AVC and music fans. This is Dave here in Texas, and hope everybody's enjoying their holidays and their Christmas, and looking forward to a little time off with their family, or just to enjoy some good food and what have you over Christmas. Lately picked up some stuff here music wise, and just been listening to some older stuff too as well. So I was listening to this the other day. This is Doc Pompous, the early years. It's called Send in the Doctor. It's on Whiskey Women and label, and supposedly this is his early years. He's a blues jazz, I think is the way they describe his music, or the way he describes his music. And it's on this label here, which I've never seen before. It's just a riverboat. But and supposedly this is a mono copy. I don't know if it ever came out in a stereo copy or what, but if someone were to mention Doc, I want to call him Pomus, you'd probably say you never heard of him, and I was the same way. This is the early years from 1944 to 1955. This is a picture of him on the back on some crutches. He was born in Brooklyn, and you know, had as a child had some kind of disease similar to polio. Here he is up here in this corner with Duke Ellington. But he got started there in New York City. Like I said, he was born in Brooklyn and got started in New York City as a singer. He also used to play, I think, guitar or piano. I forget which. This actually has a bunch of liner notes on it. And the sound of it kind of reminds me of something like Chicago blues in a way. It's not just him with a rock with a guitar, but he is embellished with a sax player and a piano player and various other instruments to kind of flesh out his sound. But like I said, if I were to say his the songs that he had written, you probably recognize a few of them. Like he wrote Teenager in Love, that was made a hit by Dion and the Belmonts, and Lonely Avenue, which was made famous by Ray Charles, Say the Last Dance for Me, This Magic Moment by the Drifters, Surrender, his latest Flame, Little Sister, Viva Las Vegas by Elvis Presley. He actually wrote a lot of songs by for Elvis Presley. Go Jimmy Go by Jimmy Clayton, and Can't Get Used to Losing You, which was a hit for Andy Williams. But and various other songs which he drew royalties for. I imagine he made a nice you know, life on just the royalties that he made off of the songs that he had written. But none of those songs are on here. The songs on here are just kind of early days blues type songs. And there's some early jazz musicians that play on here as well with him. But I don't know if I can find who else is playing on here with him real quick. But yeah, this is just a nice blues album. Kind of reminds me of something about, you know, like I said, Chicago blues, or there's a particular blues musician I was going to name off, but I can't think of his name now. I've got 2 of his albums over there or more. But at any rate, if you like blues or blues jazz, you probably like that album as well. I was also listening to this one. It's a Charlie Byrd album with Alrindio Almeida. But and it's just I saw Cosmic Pickle talking about Charlie Byrd here the other day on his channel, Cosmic Pickle channel, and he mentioned Charlie Byrd, and so I hadn't heard this album in a while, and I pulled it out just to listen to, and it's just guitar duos, classical guitar duos, done in kind of a, most of them I say is more like a jazzy style, bossa nova and stuff like that. But it's just real pleasant sort of, you know, Latin type album. It kind of reminds me more of something for the summer months or whatever. On here, Milt Holland plays percussion, and they also have a bass player as well. The name of the album is Brazilian Soul on the Conte record label, which is a subsidiary of Concord Jazz label. But yeah, it's just some pleasant Brazilian music that if you like that kind of music, then it's worth checking into. I was listening to this album as well. This is the very best of Hank Williams, and it's got a lot of his hit songs on it. It certainly doesn't have all of them. The reason I picked this out here was because the other night I was watching the Last Picture Show, which is Larry McMurtry. He wrote that. I guess it came from a book, and also probably wrote the part of the teleplay for it. But the Last Picture Show has a lot of early movie stars in it, like Bo Hopkins and Sybil Shepherd and Randy Quaid, and just a lot of early movie stars in it. It's just about a small Texas town, which probably Larry McMurtry lives up in Archer, Texas, or lives up in that area. He was also noted for the Western film Lonesome Dove. But in the Last Picture Show, that particular movie, it's shot in black and white, and it's just about a small Texas town, very isolated and rural in a way, and the soundtrack really portrays the era, which is like the early 50s, around 1951, something like that. And they play a lot of country western type music, Hank Williams, Eddie Arnold, and various music like that, you know, like Hey Good Lookin' and Jambalaya and Cold Cold Heart. You know, they play various Hank Williams songs and all the songs of that era. And particularly towards the very last part of the movie, they play this. It's not really a song per se. It's a very odd record that my parents used to have called In the Book, I think is the name of it, which sounds like a. As a kid, I used to think it sounded like a sermon, but it's a guy just making fun of certain passages in this book. But I thought that was interesting to hear that. But real good performance by Ben Johnson too, which is kind of a character actor of old westerns, John Wayne westerns and so forth. I picked this up at the library here the other day. They had a little cell in their alcove. This is Kingdom of the Sun, which is on the Non Such Explorer series label, and it's just some Peru Inca heritage music. and on it there are a lot of just local and indigenous musicians that play on here, and it's pretty neat because they play all kind of stringed instruments. Like you can see this guy right here, he's got some kind of a harp instrument, and it's in a sling, and then there's like wind instruments and flutes, and it's pretty good the way they recorded it, because they'll play like a stringed music sound, and then they'll alternate it with some flutes maybe, and they have Andean harps on here and panpipes, and you know, all kind of different Spanish instruments and what have you, flutes and so forth. But it's just a pretty pleasant album. Kind of reminds me of some of that Paul Simon. He did a similar influenced album. Rhythm of the Saints, I think, was the name of it. And it also kind of reminds me a little bit of that Paul Simon song that he did with Art Garfunkel called El Condor Pasa, which reminds me, this music reminds me of that, or vice versa as well. But it's just a real pleasant album, kind of more summery, but yeah, it was a good album. I was listening to this, picked this up off of eBay. This is RMI, which stands for Radio Massacre International, and it's a synthesizer album. The name of this one is called Time in Motion. I don't like the album cover on it, but it's a 2 CD set on the Cuneiform Records record label, and I do like that record label. This is different from the general stuff they put on that record label, which is kind of more progressive and jazzy and what have you, inspired. But this is all, well, mostly synthesizer. All the 3 guys in the band play synthesizer, but one of them also plays bass guitar, and one of them plays regular guitar, and another one plays percussion as well. And then they have a guy on here that plays wind instruments and electronics as well. And I was expecting something really, I think they are kind of Berlin School influence, like Tangerine Dream and Klaus Schulze and stuff like that. And I was really expecting something that was like really, you know, sequencer driven. But they kind of surprised me starting out. They do have some sequencers on here, but the way it starts out is they kind of start out with some guitar, and it's not real heavy or anything, but it's just, I think, and also what sounds like sax on the first cut. But I think what that is a synthesizer, and that's just the voice of the synthesizer, or the patch that he's using that kind of sounds like a saxophone. But as you might imagine, it gets pretty spacey. So if you're kind of into that, some of that synthesizer space music, or new age music, you might like this one as well. And I was listening to this the other day. It's Salif Keita, maybe is how you say his name. And it's an African musician, Soro. He was supposedly born into a large family. This is on the Mango Records label. But supposedly he was one of 7 children or something like that, a rather large family. And his father is like, I don't know, a king or something over there in Africa, and he told his dad he wanted to be a musician, which his dad didn't care for very much, and disowned him. but he's he's still making music today, so that it didn't faze him any. But most of the lyrics are printed on the inside album sleeve, but and it's pretty good music. It's something that I haven't listened to a lot lately, so I pulled it out and listened to it here recently. He sings in his own African language, but like I said, they did print the lyrics here in English, so that you can read along, follow along, if that's what you want to do. But it's a pretty good album. I don't know if it's my favorite African album or not. I really need to listen to it a lot more than what I've done. But was real curious what this album sounded like, so I listened to it again, and it's nice enough. I just need to really listen to it some more. I bought this here the other day too. This is Aka Moon, the Constellation box. This is 20 CDs of their probably most of their music. A lot of it is studio music, but some of it is live as well. It comes with this little booklet here, and of course it has, you know, the music, the musicians that are all on here, and you know, write-ups about the band and all their different incarnations of the band. And the basic band, it's a Belgian jazz band is what it is, and the basic band is 3 musicians which play sax, bass, and drums, and then they also embellish their sound by adding more musicians, or they've embellished their sound a little bit more by adding more musicians to the band. Like they play sometimes with Indian musicians, and it kind of gives them a little bit of an Indian sound, similar to something like this album here, maybe a little bit. This is John McLaughlin's Shakti band, which if you haven't ever heard this album, it's a really great album. But in fact, I almost prefer this album to some of this off this Aka Moon. But if you've not heard this album, it's a real good album to pick up. But Aka is a word that they get from a pygmy tribe in the Amazon. But and I'll leave a link below if you're interested in you know, what they sound like. But they have a lot of different musicians. Like all these people have played on the album as well. This side over here is the album titles. The other side is a lot of the musicians that have played on the different albums on here. And I haven't heard all these albums either. I've only heard a couple of them. I'll pick one out and play it ever so often, and you know, I haven't gone through all of them. But there's a album on here called Guitars, which Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd has contributed some music to that particular album. What does their music sound like? They're kind of broad. They even though they're just a 3-piece, when they add those other musicians, sometimes they'll have Indian musicians that'll play with them. Sometimes they'll have African musicians that will play with them. Sometimes they'll have a pianist or keyboardist that will play with them. And so they kind of change their sound and embellish their sound that way. But their music is anything from you know, can sound like anything from modern classical to something like Weather Report, kind of fusiony, to you know, maybe something like Rock and Opposition, something like that to progressive jazz. I think overall I'd describe their sound as just progressive jazz overall, but then you've got those world elements of Indian music and African music, and there's even an album on here that's sort of big band orientated, you know, and so yeah, I don't know, a little bit of classical thrown in there too, modern classical. So overall, I've just been listening to some of the albums on here, and I haven't quite got through them all, but it's been a real interesting listen. So anyway, that's what I've been listening to lately. Mostly I found a real good deal at one of the pawn shops, and I bought a bunch of DVDs of some old Doctor Who shows, and I was real happy to run into them because I'm kind of a sci-fi fan as well as being a music fan and what have you. And I ran into a bunch of Doctor Who, which I didn't bring with me, DVDs, but I didn't think anybody was interested in seeing that. But I ran into something like 20 plus DVDs, and I picked them up as well, and just started kind of watching those. So anyway, this is the music I've been listening to here lately and stuff. Old stuff I've been listening to, and along with some of the new stuff I picked up. So hope everybody is having looking forward to their holiday, and has a peaceful holiday, enjoying their family, and at the same time listening to some music. So we'll talk to you later.